Hello, everyone. I'm Rachel Wormald, General Manager of the Drinks Association, and thank you all for joining us today. Before I introduce our speaker for today's webinar, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this webinar from the lands of the Cammeraygal people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. Today, I'm delighted to introduce James Phillips, Client Solutions Director at NIQ, who's here to share with us some very exciting, never-before-seen insights into the Australian drinks industry. In 2022, CGA, an international on-premise measurement, insight and research consultancy, was acquired by NIQ, the world's leading consumer intelligence company with operations in over 90 markets. As a result of the acquisition, NIQ now offers an unmatched view of consumer behaviour across both the on and off-premise channels, paving the way for new growth opportunities for Australian liquor suppliers and retailers. The Drinks Association is very proud to have NIQ as a corporate partner, as they align with our commitment to connect our members, suppliers, retailers, and wider drinks community with the data and insights needed to achieve commercial success. It's a pleasure to have James here with us today, and on that note, I'll hand over to him to get started.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Super excited to be here presenting on behalf of NIQ and with the Drinks Association. Hats off to you, Rachel, as well. I know you were called up last minute to do that intro, so thank you very much. We've got a pretty packed agenda today, so I'll get moving on what we're going to cover off today. So really, our menu for today is not a state of the nation. It is really trying to look at some key topics that we have started to delve into with new insights that are coming into the NIQ product suite. So today we're really going to focus on sort of three sort of big topics. One is changing occasions across both the on and off premise in Australia. A look at some innovation that we think is quite interesting right now across RTDs and low carb. And then finally, a bit around digital drinks and the evolving path to purchase, and particularly how that's translating across e-commerce, but also into the on-premise through loyalty. Now, we're utilising some new insights from a liquor perspective at NIQ, particularly our NIQ Liquor Omni Shopper panel, which has launched this year, providing a higher granular level of detail around the shopper in the off-trade across the Australian market, both in the brick and mortar channel and online. But also, we're looking at on-premise insights, and Rachel mentioned that earlier, around our consumer and sales data to give that view of the total trade, plus some really interesting case studies, both from our advanced analytics team and also our Bases innovation team. So let's get stuck into it. So the first section, this calls for a drink. We're really interested right now to see the changing dynamics around what is happening with occasions in both the on and off premise in Australia. From our recent consumer outlook, we know that a huge proportion of Australians are really monitoring their spend right now. We've sort of segmented these consumers into different buckets. And what we've seen is those that are grouped into the strugglers, those that have suffered financial insecurity and continue to do so today, the rebounders, maybe they experienced income or job loss and now they're back on track or they're trying to get back on track. And the cautious segment, those not impacted financially, but are still really monitoring their spend. This group of people is at the highest level we've seen over the last few years, and really since times when COVID was quite strong. The really interesting part to note is that in January 2024, this year, we're back to levels of strugglers that we saw during that COVID people. So spend is a really important issue for consumers right now. But then when we look at, I guess, spending intentions and looking forward, it doesn't paint a fantastic picture for the drinks industry. what we're seeing is the net difference between those who will say they're spending more in the future in certain categories or less in the future. And the two key ones to call out are probably the out-of-home dining. There's a big proportion of people that say they're spending less in this channel in the next 12 months. But then also when we double click into, I guess, FMCG and grocery and household items, alcoholic beverages in that discretionary spend is really sitting at the bottom with a greater net proportion of people saying they're spending less in the next 12 months. So it's a worrying situation for the industry, and it's really down to consumers, I guess, redefining some of these values and focusing more on planning and at-home occasions as well. So what we've seen through our consumer outlook is there's sort of these redefined consumer values revolving around the homebody lifestyle, waste avoidance, preventative health, stress management, planned budgeting, and convenience seeking. And we see a lot of this come to life across the drinks market and in the trade. But the one that I really wanted to focus on in terms of the changing nature of occasion was probably the one with the highest proportion of respondents saying how they're redefining these values. And it was all about spending more time at home and going out less. So this really goes to the heart of that changing occasions. Now we look at some of our omni shopper data around the off trade here to really understand, what the dynamics are of people consuming at home or purchasing in the off trade, or shoppers in this case. And in general, we've seen penetration levels relatively stable over the past year. A bit of a drop down from when everyone was stuck at home and could only purchase through the off trade and couldn't go out. Really, the one category where we've seen a penetration loss is through spirits. But then as we sort of dive into the overall volume behavior and the value behavior and what's really contributed to growth, the two big buckets seem to be overall more visits or more occasions per buying household driving a lot of that value growth and increases in average unit price. But this has really been balanced by, I guess, a big decrease in those units per occasion. And as we look into the different categories, really when we look at all the growth, all of that is coming through the occasions or the frequency of buying households going into total liquor in the off trade. When we look at beer, again, it's this frequency of occasion driven, but also value per occasion. And we think there's a big mixed benefit within the categories of people coming back into probably a cheaper absolute value in beer and cider. Wine seems to be buoyed by, again, that increase in frequency of occasion. But spirits is really finding it tough due to the number of buying households, so that penetration loss, even though there are a more increase in the number of occasions and the value per occasions. The one where we're seeing a decline is RTDs, and this is the only one where we're seeing people reduce the number of occasions that they're buying across households. Now, shifting over to the on-premise, it's really interesting to see that obviously there's an increase in the number of occasions that people are consuming at home, and that shift into more occasions at home. What we're seeing is a bit of the opposite in the on-premise, and we think a lot of these occasions in terms of the drinking occasions in the off and on are moving from the on-premise back into the off and back at home. And what we've seen over sort of the last 12 months since sort of a peak in April 2023 is that drink-led occasions, that penetration has really dropped off towards March this year, so that last 12-month period. And combined with this, we've seen a net decrease in the frequency of people going out, the difference between people going out more or less often. And so overall, we're seeing in the on-premise this drop in penetration and occasions really impacting the performance of the channel. Although it's interesting to note that the on-premise still plays a really important role in some high-ticket celebratory occasions, special occasions for a lot of consumers, with penetration levels remaining, relatively high across the last couple of periods we've run our survey. But where we're seeing the impact is these high frequency consumers trended over time. We're starting to see a bigger increase of those proportion of people going to the on-premise less frequently. And so this ties into that story of less occasions in the on-premise, but an increase at home. And it's coming to life in the sales data we're seeing as well. Our value velocity is a measure of the average value change across our sample of outlets in Australia in the on-premise. And we've seen a big decrease in this value velocity. But when we see the drivers of it, the two main ones are either the check value, so the total spend on the check, or the ticket count that people have, or the number of occasions or the number of tickets that a venue is driving. And the bigger drive really is that ticket count. It is a combination of both that penetration and that frequency that's really driving, I guess, the overall decrease in value velocity in the on-premise. So the sales data is really backing up what we're seeing consumers saying they're doing in the on-premise. So we actually asked these consumers in the on-premise, what are they doing at home? You know, what kind of occasions are they replacing the on-premise at home with? And it seems to be their sort of high energy, high drink volume occasions. The ones where we're seeing the biggest increase or the biggest net change in occasions are things like a boozy brunch, a themed event or night at home, or a high tempo drinks. So they're bringing these occasions maybe where there's a higher spend back in home, maybe to manage those cost issues that we were seeing before, those budget issues we were seeing before. That's really impacting a lot of consumers. And we're starting to see this come to life, I guess, in some examples from out in the market, where younger people seem to be replacing some of these out and about occasions with social media trends and challenges at home, recreating those kind of experiences that maybe they get in the on-premise normally with something at home. And we know it's a challenge with younger consumers as well, because even at home, it's a real challenge to recruit these consumers. And in the last year, we've seen a big drop off across all categories in terms of the life stage of people under the age of 35 with no children. So typically ones that have a higher disposable income to spend on things like drinks. And even at home, it seems to be a struggle to maintain that share of that consumer across all categories. But some suppliers are really looking at how do we address that and how do we encourage people to consume at home and really capitalize on that changing occasion from on-premise into off-premise. And here's a great example from Byron Bay Brewery, where they ran a promotion to win free rent for a year. So I think it really addresses two issues we're seeing here, that cost of living issue, maybe some of the strugglers out there, but also a way to encourage people to create great experiences at home and utilizing, I guess, the tools and the media that are relevant to these types of consumers. So what it was to essentially show Byron Bay your house party to enter and tag them through that hashtag there to essentially win this pretty awesome prize. But we're also seeing it not just with younger consumers, I think also in more sophisticated ways from some brands as well, such as spirit suppliers like Woodford Reserve, talking about how they can create this luxury cocktail party for up to 40 guests and how they can win that. So a really awesome way, I think, to elevate that experience and speak to a different consumer, potentially from what Byron Bay was doing in terms of that. So before I kind of go on to our next section, I think it's really interesting to probably just pause and sort of reflect on what are the big insights here that I'm sort of seeing from this. So I think really what it means for suppliers is you've got to think about tweaking that channel strategy. So how do you invest in both the on and off premise, and where are you going to get the biggest return right now with consumers? I think you can't ignore the value of the on premise. The ability to build brands in that space and create meaningful connections is a really strong environment to be able to do that, and has added benefits towards salience and brand consideration and brand equity. But it's really important to get the tools right and the levers right with what you've got to play with. So making sure you create the right offers, providing the right innovation within this wider economic context of what people are doing. So moving on, even in an environment where we're seeing, I guess, increased cost of living pressures, we're still seeing a real plethora of innovation in the last year. And really, I wanted to kind of look at a couple of key areas being RTDs or mixed drinks, both across on and off, but also some low carb beer, which I think is a really interesting point in time in the context of low carb. So RTDs, we know, as I said before, they've been struggling and mainly through less occasions with shoppers. But we're still seeing, obviously, we're seeing a lot of innovation, but we're also seeing some dynamics in terms of what's happening at sort of an equivalent pack size. And it really tells us a lot about the types of occasions that RTDs play in. And, we see a real differential between the cost of, say, an equivalent beer versus the cost of an RTD, like the classic Young Henry's here, or the Brookvale Union red pub soda. Ranging from a price difference of 45% on a single up to 70% at a case. It really shows the challenges of marketing to, I guess, a struggling consumer from a cost of living perspective, but also, the opportunity to really optimize different pack sizes. And what we see here is the larger case sizes, their average price per unit really increasing much more and seeing a big impact on the number of units, whereas the 10 packs having a bit better performance in terms of growth there and less price increases on that. So whether it's a right pack size for the occasion or a way to really grow that sort of in-between piece between a four pack and a 6-pack, maybe one night occasion in the 24 cases, it's really important to see. But there is a big price differential between shifting up from a 10-pack to a 24-pack. And so we think there's opportunity here to continue to innovate and continue to look at how you optimize that pack price architecture. And NIQ has a lot of abilities and capabilities to be able to use price and promotion research to be able to unpack what the best strategy is to approach these kind of areas. But even in the context of RTDs suffering, we're still seeing winners, and particularly in this light spirits area. And from our OmniShopper data, we're really starting to delve into some really interesting launches over the last couple of years. I think these have been some of the two most topical launches over the last 2 or 3 years in that light spirits RTDs space. Hard rated or hard solo, as it was known prior to the change. Those two products combined have seen a huge increase in the number of units sold. And that unit change across the last year. And the real drivers of that have been new buyers to the universe, shifting from other key products in the RTD category, but also bringing in new people into the RTD category as well. And what's interesting to note is the types of unit interactions or the products that over-index with hard rated. So things like vodka, lemon, lime, and bitters from Brookvale Union, Suntory 196, and Wild Turkey are the kind of key ones that over-index in terms of their interaction with hard-rated. On the other side, we look at Suntory 196, which was probably in a similar position to hard-rated a couple of years ago, having great performance. But it is really suffering, I guess, from a big shifting impact and shifting into other products like Card Solo or Gordon's GMT or Bilson's, but also lost buyers in general. And that lost buyers, we think, to the universe is a big piece around that pricing element in conjunction with consumers' budgets right now. But the big thing about this, bringing in a new product like Hard Solo, is the challenge of, is this incremental to the category? Is this bringing in new shoppers? Is it growing the category overall? from what we're seeing here, yes, with the new buyers it's bringing in, it's really is looking at growing the category, although it is still cannibalizing a lot from a key SKU like 196. So one to be considerate of when you're pitching things to retailers as well, that cannibalization effect. In the context of these, I guess, soft drinks that are now partnering with Spirits brand, we thought we'd bring a really great example from our Basies team and our innovation team of what we did in the US with Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola. Essentially, the product was launched and Coca-Cola came to us saying we need to tweak the formulation to improve it. How do we improve the product overall? And what we did was use AI to develop thousands and thousands of in-market product assessments. So utilizing different sensory profiles to create some new formulations, which we tested with consumers, AI allowed us to essentially expand that over a number of different attributes and product assessments to be able to come up with some really innovative and stronger formulations for Coca-Cola with Jack Daniels. And once they implemented that change and they optimized that formulation with the use of AI, it drove a massive increase in sales on the product, increased the sales velocity massively, and we saw a bigger increase in that loyalty and the repeat purchases. So I think it's really interesting in the context of a launch and then a relaunch within this RTD space, and how you can continue to tweak that strategy and that product strategy to improve overall performance. Now, thinking about mixed drinks in the on-premise, it takes a really different shape, right? Because not only do you have RTDs offered in cans, but you also have spirits with a mixer, or you have spirits mixed with cocktails. And what we see really interestingly from a demographic profile is they lean much more towards younger consumers. And even the 18 to 24-year-olds, a higher proportion of consumers consume that than beer or wine in cocktails. And thinking about how they're delivered and the serve types as well, what we're noticing is a big increase in the visibility of on-tap offerings in the on-premise around mixed drinks. So this covers cocktails and mixed drinks as well, with 54% of consumers we surveyed this year saying, yes, they had seen cocktails on tap or mixed drinks on tap in the on-premise. But there's still big barriers to getting this right in the on-premise and getting these kind of mixed drinks right in the on-premise, because it's all about quality and the perception of quality. They think 45% of consumers think quality is improving, but it still isn't as good as cocktails mixed by bartenders. So it presents a challenge and an opportunity, I think. For suppliers, it really is a horses for courses, or the right channel to choose. A place where quality maybe isn't as important, where maybe it's all about speed of service and delivering on the operational needs of consumers, and providing a product that meets that quality value matrix and delivers on those kind of key needs for the consumers. So we went into a pub because we wanted to kind of have a look at what's happening on tap as well with some of these cocktails or mixed drinks on tap. And we went into our local here in North Sydney, the Rag and Famish, and we found that actually 1 in 7 taps, or 14% of taps in this venue, were beyond beer. And when we say beyond beer, that includes cider, ginger beer, hard rated there, or a mixed drink, cocktails on tap, seltzers. But actually what we see from our most recent Opus update in March this year is that actually consumers say their ideal tap lineups are much higher than that. So they're looking for more. They're looking for more with 32% share of beyond beer in the pub segment itself. And actually, in terms of beyond beer, the pub segment really under indexes in terms of the needs of consumers there. So there's a lot of opportunity to go in this space from what we're seeing in the market versus what consumers, are expecting. But you really need to get the offer right, as I mentioned before. And the key things that consumers really want from this seem to all be about price, value, quality, and convenience when it comes to these kind of mixed drinks offers on taps or cocktails on taps. So it really can really drive and help the channel strategy around where these are offered. You know, high volume venues, probably a cheaper or a cost strategy in terms of what's offered there, rather than maybe the the craft cocktail bar, where the experience of a bartender and the recommendation of a bartender is much more important. And the great thing about, I guess, the on tap or the mixed drinks on draft is that it really solves some operator needs and not necessarily just consumer needs. And it really allows them to, at the end of the day, maximize what they're looking to do, and that's maximize their profit margin. And so it solves a couple of things around, new staff that need training. It means you don't have to go through, extensive training on how to make different types of cocktails. And also, it means you can rethink about the operations of how many staff you need to make cocktails in the first place if you've got a really quick, efficient way to drive that. So it really addresses what we think are some key operator challenges. And when we talk to bartenders at the beginning of the year and operators at the beginning of the year, some of these key factors were the ones that stood out as the biggest challenges they have right now. So I think this is a way for draft innovation to come in and really solve that challenge. But it's not for everyone. We recently talked to a venue manager at the Osborne Hotel at another webinar, and he is from a venue that is amazing craft beer venue, but for them, they think it really takes away from the experience and the creativity of their staff, takes away from the theatre of their providing what they can for the consumer through an elevated experience. So it's not for them. And we see that as a way for the Osborne here to probably premiumize their offering through cocktails versus a different kind of pub. So it's really interesting to see that this isn't for everyone. Now, moving on, low carb, I mentioned that as another area which for a lot of people probably is a bit surprising, considering probably 15 years ago this seemed to be the biggest trend. But I think the underlying thing here with low carb, or the underlying macro trend in low carb, is more based in health and well-being, and something that is still a big topic in drinks for consumers. So we first wanted to give you a great example from Over the Ditch, where we had a great breakthrough innovation from our Bases team, the Steinlager Ultra Low Carb launch in New Zealand. So the low carb segment in New Zealand really surprised me when I visited last year. It's something that's been booming for a number of years now, and the shelf has really expanded rapidly, going from 3 brands in December 2020 to 14 brands by August 2023, with astronomical value growth in the segment. And really in New Zealand, the low carb segment, or the lighter options segment, is what is driving the beer segment in that market. But Steinlager came in to really try and stretch that segmentation and provide an offer that was ultra carb free, or that 99% carb free, an offering that at the time most brands hadn't really launched into. And again, it sort of plays into this longer term lighter option beer that consumers were really looking for. So what we did, with Bases, was we made sure we did multiple rounds of sensory research to really test what was the right option here. So there are a couple of things that are really important. Great taste was obviously a must for the Steinlager Ultra Low Carb, but also the appeal needs to look really great in terms of the concept and the sensory results versus other competitors' offerings. A lighter, fresher looking pack design to really elevate that health and well-being element of the low carb, and the crisp white can and clear bottle, really modernized it as well. So it wasn't enough to compete in low carb just by maintaining the taste of Steinlager. They really need to provide something that really overcame some of the barriers, really particularly around that flavor profile and the bitterness as well. And what we've seen in New Zealand is, as I mentioned, this huge growth in this lighter style options in the last year. But what it seems to be replacing is sort of this seltzer or soda trend that sort of seems to be on the wane in New Zealand. And I think they both solve a need around lower carb, lower calories at the same time. But what might be different between the two is that absolute pricing. If you look at a 4-pack of seltzer or soda versus a 6-pack of beer, the value equation is very different for consumers, and particularly younger consumers that don't have huge incomes right now. But it's all very well and interesting in New Zealand, but what's happening in Australia, and I think as Australian suppliers, it's really interesting to look at that. And as I mentioned before, about 15 years ago, I thought that was when the real low carb beer revolution was happening. But I think we're seeing a tightening of belts here too. Excuse the pun. We're seeing firstly, classic low carb brands like Hahn launching into that ultra low space as well, but also really growing significantly. And what our Omni Shopper panel says is that they are in significant value growth in this space. But we've also seen low carb innovation launches across the board, not only in craft, but also in some really established brands like Victoria Bitter this year, and also across a wider range of beers as well. So there's a lot of innovation coming through in this space as well, which to me really indicates that category growth that's going on there, with an increase in that sort of saturation of these types of brands. And as well, seltzers here are kind of losing that sizzle. So I think where we're seeing this kind of health and well-being trend continuing to evolve is in the context of financial pressures for consumers here. But with all this innovation, I think it's really useful to think about, how do you make space for this type of innovation at shelf? There is a limited shelf space. I don't believe beer will be getting any bigger macro opportunities to increase their space. So I wanted to give an example from the US where we worked with a spirit supplier over there to really optimize their range through a product we called Shelf Architect. And what we essentially did was allowed this supplier to make a recommendation about how they could maintain the current number of items in the total category and still allow for growth in terms of value. And that's what they did there, contributing, and it's a huge number, $230 million US dollars to that category. But for them as well as a supplier, they were even able to decrease the average number of items they had in the trade from 55 to 52, but still increase their own revenue and also increase their value share. So I think that is a really important thing in the context of the range and space of the shelf, in that there's ways to really optimize to get a better result across categories as well. Cool. So that really kind of summed up the innovation pieces, two interesting topics around RTDs and low carb and how that's changing, but also how do you then sort of take that to retailers in a way that allows them to continue to grow the category with the same number of SKUs on shelf. Digital drinks. So we'll finish up with this as the last piece, but we just wanted to delve into a bit more around this Omni Shopper journey that's going on across the total trade, and not only the e-commerce side of it, that transaction side of it, but also that journey of discovery and how people use digital to make decisions on the way to that final moment of purchase. In addition to this, we can't ignore the on-premise as always, and how digital plays a really interesting role there, and we'll really focus on how loyalty is changing that space as well. So online, we know it serves a role, particularly with more affluent shoppers at a key life stage. They're more likely to be older than 35 with kids and have a higher household income than the rest of our Omni Shopper panel. But what we've actually seen is a big normalization of off-trade online penetration. So since everyone being stuck at home, they're allowed to now go and explore their freedom. But we have seen that penetration drop off and probably normalize a bit in terms of that penetration to being about 9% across the last 52 weeks. But as I mentioned, the digital journey, consumer journey, it isn't just that transaction, that moment of purchase. We can obviously start to measure that e-commerce element through our Omni Shopper panel and how that dynamic changes and the value that is going through there. But it's really important to consider this journey from the occasion that people have, whether it's that change from the on-premise into home, that they have this initial consideration set, they go through active evaluation, and how digital can play a different part along each of these steps in the journey. But then more than that, it's about that post-purchase and that loyalty loop as well, how they then go to interact with the brand and then consider it as part of their future journey. And thinking of that, the on-premise is another area where we start to have to think about that ongoing online presence and consumer journey as well. And also the longer term relationship and the opportunities for increased loyalty in this space. So recently we talked to consumers about reward programs that they're seeing in bars, restaurants and pubs and their usage of them as well. And what we've seen is there is a proportion of consumers out there who are continuing to use these loyalty apps in these types of scenarios. So it's really interesting to start to think about loyalty in the space of the on-premise, where I think for a long time it's been thought of just in the off-trade. What we see is a much higher uptake with younger consumers as well in terms of those utilising them, and then starts to drop off pretty significantly as they go above 55. And then in terms of frequency, when they're actually in, what we see is that consumers really use them quite frequently, with 42% of people saying they're using it most times and 36% saying they're using these loyalty-based reward programs every time they visit a bar, restaurant and pub, which is huge. To have that sort of engagement and that level of one-to-one conversation with your consumer is really interesting. And thinking about the different venues, because really we have seen a lot of growth in these types of apps, but they're not for every type of venue. And what we find is actually they're more likely to be used in restaurants, pubs, RSLs and sports clubs, but starts to drop off, I guess, in more intimate settings like late night bars or cocktail bars. And I also think you have to consider, is that the right strategy, not only for your brands, but also as an operator in the industry as well. And just a couple of examples of recent launches we've seen as well. We've seen Pub Plus coming to market from ALH, really offering strong member specials and this reward system inbuilt into it. But also from a probably more premium hospitality group, Applejack, that's offering vouchers or a free cocktail with sign up, and really looking at giving unique offers to their customers here in Sydney as well. So it's interesting to see that it's not only the mass appeal of big pub groups, but also much more targeted to a more premium consumer in terms of venue groups as well, with Applejack there. But getting the right offers and those early offers, as we sort of seen through those two apps, is really important to drive success and sign up, to make sure that they can continue those long-term relationships with consumers. So the key ones being food and drink combination discounts and reward offers as being the key ones to encourage people to sign up. So I think that's important for how suppliers can now work with operators to create great offers right now as these operators continue to launch and build out these loyalty apps as well. So I think really good food for thought for how you insert your own brand within that consumer journey, within that loyalty loop, and particularly in the on-premise as well. So that's all for me today, but I want to just leave everyone with a few kind of key learnings from what we're seeing. I think the big one we're seeing is that shift from occasions in the on-premise to at home as well. But we know you can't ignore the on-premise, and we know that brands in the past have really been able to win in the on-premise and sustain that through the trade by continuing to invest in the on-premise during tough economic times. And we always consider the outweighed benefits to brand equity that you can build there as well, that build across the trade. So really at this point in time, I think it's a good point in time to reconsider your on-premise strategy and what you do right now, whether it's doubling down to really win in that space or tweaking it to the right targeting and the right channels. But also, I think it's an important time to understand that off-trade occasion and how it's interacting between online and brick and mortar and utilizing something like our Omni Shopper panel. Innovation, we're still seeing a lot of this. But in uncertain economic environment, I think we're seeing it come to life in a really different way, really evolving within sort of these ongoing macro consumer trends, such as health and well-being, but also value for money, the treat occasion and at-home experiences. So I think the really key thing here is if you're going to innovate, and there's a lot of risk around innovation, we see so much innovation fail, you really need to be confident that you're launching the right kind of strategy here, that you're launching the right kind of innovation. And that's where NIQ Bases can really come in and support that. And finally, I think e-commerce liquor penetration is declining is quite significant. And that commercial transaction plays a significant role in the consumer journey, but we can't ignore the full consideration of that digital path to purchase and how brands can play an active role across those different stages to really support the overall transaction. Further to this as well, I think that on-premise element is super interesting right now in that launch of a number of loyalty apps over the past year or couple of years in the on-premise, and provides a great opportunity for suppliers and operators to work together to not only provide great offers to consumers, build that one-to-one relationship and start to understand consumers more, but also continue to drive footfall back out into a channel, which we know is super valuable for a lot of suppliers. So that's it for me today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join the webinar today, and also to the Drinks Association for hosting us. If you've got any questions or would like to learn more about what we offer at NIQ, please feel free to reach out to myself or through your Drinks Association contact. But at this point, we also wanted to ask you and hear more from you about what you'd like to see more of in the future. So the team have set up a bit of a QR code and a poll for you to enter some responses in. There's some preset questions in there, so please use the QR code, scan and submit anything you'd like to hear of more in the future. Alternatively, if you've got something that doesn't fit within that preset text, please input something into the Q&A. And we can look at that as well if it's not covered. So that's all from me. Thank you very much. I think we're going to now get up the poll and have a look at some of the responses coming in. Great, so we kind of bucketed it up into things like global trends, on-premise insights, more real-life case studies, wine insights, cocktails, e-commerce, and path to purchase. At the moment there, it looks like a lot of people are really interested in that path to purchase element, e-commerce and digital, on-premise, global trends. So thanks for all those responses. Please keep them coming in. We're really keen to hear what you're interested in. These kind of topics are awesome for future pieces of thought leadership or just engaging with you as well in the future. But again, if you have any kind of questions or things that aren't covered by the poll, please submit them in the Q&A and the chat, and we can take that feedback on as well. Great. Thank you very much.